Welcome to the Little as Much podcast. I'm Cameron.
And this is Morgan.
We are just a young couple desiring to serve God and raise a family in this present world based off Titus 2:12.
We have seen God take the little we have to offer and do much more than we could ever imagine.
Join us as we share personal real-life experiences and what God is teaching us along the way.
We will cover topics of faith, family, and everyday life from a Christian and biblical perspective.
Welcome back to the podcast. In today's episode, we're going to be going over our love story.
I feel like we have a pretty unique love story, but maybe I just think that because it's ours. We could possibly do a his perspective versus her perspective kind of deal when it comes to our love story, because one of us, I'm not going to say who, tends to be a little exaggerative when it comes to certain parts.
She was in love with me at first sight.
Exactly. So we're going to try to go ahead and just jump right into this, though, so we can fit all of this in one episode, because there actually are quite a few details to our love story. I am going to go ahead and let Cameron, though, jump in.
Yeah. So I was a career firefighter. I had been at our local fire department for about 2 or 3 months, and at the time I was lost. I was getting into some worldly things. I was going out with the guys a lot and just getting into some bad stuff, but I was also a volunteer firefighter at the same time, and I pretty much just lived at the station. If I wasn't at work, I was at the volunteer station running calls, hanging out with the guys, working out, and then would just stay there every night. That's where we'd do our meals. I lived there. That was pretty much my home. But one of the guys on my career shift, he was actually a part-time employee at another EMS agency that was close to us, and he was actually going to be having his first EMT class.
And that's kind of where I come in. So I was working at the hospital, and at the hospital they are always encouraging you to further your education, whether that is a degree or a certification. And at the same time, when they were kind of pushing me to do that, my sister Mackenzie, she had signed up for this EMT class because she was wanting to get into the EMS world for a career. And I also had some friends that were also EMTs, and they were encouraging me, just go ahead, take the class, you could get that certification. So I ended up sitting at a little ice cream shop one evening, just randomly signed up for the class and was like, okay, here I go, I'm gonna do it. Well, lo and behold, like Cameron mentioned, the guy that was on his shift was my instructor. Our class was pretty small, so we all became very close. And the instructor went to my sister Mackenzie, and he had mentioned, like, hey, there's this guy on my shift at my career station. I think that him and Morgan would really get along. We should set something up so they can meet. My sister, being the good, typical sister she is, was like, give me all the details, send me some pictures. So she was kind of putting that bug in my ear, telling me, hey, our instructor has this friend on his shift. He thinks you guys should meet. And I was like, absolutely not. I have always been very guarded, and I was not really in search for a boyfriend at this time. And I also was like, I don't even know if he's saved. I know nothing about him. It could be a disaster. So I am not going to touch it with a 10-foot pole. But my sister and my instructor, they definitely, kept at it. And they actually connived and decided to set something up. They told me that our class was going to be going to our instructor's career station, and he was going to be setting up EMS scenarios with the firefighters, and they were going to help us practice our patient scenarios. So acting out different scenes and patient cases that you could come up on. We were doing this for our test. So I showed up with my sister and looked around, and nobody else from our class was there. It was just me and my sister that got invited. So I immediately knew something was up. me and Mackenzie were sitting in their meeting room just kind of studying some stuff before we started scenarios, and actually the door came open and Cameron actually came in. I didn't know for sure it was him at the time, but he just kind of looked shocked because I don't think he was expecting it to be us in there. And he looked at us and was like, "Hey, and said our instructor's name. Has he been in here?" And so me and Mackenzie answered, and then he walked out, and Mackenzie, of course, was like, "That was Cameron." I thought he was cute and everything, but I still was like, "Oh my goodness, I cannot believe you guys did this to me." And then we started into the scenarios, and they were all thought they were so funny. And they made Cameron the patient, and they made my sister the EMT that was supposed to be responding to Cameron. And of course, they tell me that I am going to be Cameron's wife in this situation, and I'm going to be coming up and telling the EMT that, I'm Cameron's wife and that he's a diabetic. And so, of course, there was lots of, cutting eyes and laughing, but what they didn't know was years later I actually would end up being Cameron's wife, which
Little did they know.
Yes, which was actually, it's a pretty cute part, I think, of our story. In that time when we first met at the fire station, Cameron, what was your first impression?
I thought Morgan was absolutely beautiful.
No.
And I could honestly see, even though that was like the first time I'd really gotten to see her. I'd seen her come a few other times to the station to train, or they had a class at our station, or I think they did a tour one time of the fire trucks and the ambulances at my station. But that time was the time that I actually really got to see Morgan, and I saw that she was beautiful, of course, but then I saw something just completely different in her. I could tell that she was just a godly young lady, and I loved that. That was definitely the number one thing, and then her beauty was just an added second.
Yeah, and I definitely thought Cameron was cute and everything. I was attracted to him, but I was still, of course, very guarded and was like, there's no way this will ever work out. So I kind of kept my distance a little bit. We ran into each other a couple more times. I think we had both brought patients to the hospital at the same time once or twice, and so we had running into each other at the hospital. We also got invited to come to their station's Thanksgiving dinner the day before Thanksgiving, and so I got to interact with him some more then. It was getting close to Christmas at this point, and our church was actually building a new building, and there was a volunteer fire station right down the road.
Mm-hmm.
Like, how far is it? I mean,
like a tenth or a quarter of a mile.
Yeah,
probably.
Right down the road. And some of those firefighters actually come up to our church, the construction site, and filled some barrels of water that we needed. And so our church was really appreciative towards them, and we were wanting to do something for them for Christmas as like a thank you. So we had put together like a gift basket, a thank you basket. We had made some goodies, and lo and behold, guess who was a volunteer at that station? This is just how God works.
Yeah. So that was actually my volunteer fire station, if you hadn't picked up on that yet. But Morgan's sister actually knew that I had volunteered there because their instructor had been talking to them, and he kind of put two and two together, and then Morgan and her sister, they put two and two together, and then Mackenzie, she had actually gotten my number first, and she was coordinating this goodie box drop-off with me, and they finally came, and it was Morgan and her sister and her mom and her little brother. So I was super excited that her little brother got to come because I got to show him all the fire trucks, and I loved doing that when I worked at the stations. I loved when people would come and bring their kids, and I'd get to show them the big fire trucks and the ambulances. But I got to show him all the fire trucks, the ladder truck, the ambulance. I even got to get him up in one of our 1950s fire trucks, and just to be able to see his face light up and see him have fun getting up in them. And it was just a blast having them come to the station, and all the stuff that they brought us was just great.
Yeah, and of course, I tagged along with my little brother and Cameron as he was showing, I of course volunteered to be the one to go with them. So me and Cameron got to interact a little bit more then. And actually, that night, I got Cameron's number from my sister to text him and tell him thank you for taking Josiah around to see all of the engines. And that was the first text that was sent between us. I actually sent the first text. And then from there, we just started texting kind of casually. Me and Cameron and Mackenzie went out to grab pizza one night. And then I had started, inviting him to church, and our church was actually having a kids Christmas program that I was directing, and so I had invited Cameron and our instructor to come, and they actually did end up coming, and so that was really nice. They got to come and see my church, so that was something that was really neat. But after that, I kept just inviting him, encouraging him, come to a service. Of course, we were also texting about spiritual things, of course, everyday things too. But we were having some deeper conversations about salvation and, just about what God had done in my life. And I was trying to be a witness to Cameron, and he was sharing some things about his life with me. He was telling me, that he had grandparents that were also Baptist. And so there was that kind of connection that he knew a little bit about it and had been to church with them a couple of times. And so we were just chatting back and forth, but I just kept my distance in a way and just kept inviting him to church. Well, finally, on March 10th, Cameron went ahead and showed up at church on a Sunday morning.
Yep. I had just gotten off shift, and I went home real quick and got as dressed up as I could. I didn't have a suit. I just threw on some cowboy boots, some blue jeans, a shirt and tie, and a sport coat, and thought I was something else, but I thought I wanted to dress up a little bit for church. So I grabbed my Bible, and I finally went to church on that March 10th. And like Morgan said, that was the day I got saved on the way to the Mexican restaurant. And I actually mentioned that in our last episode about with our testimonies. But that day, I stayed at Morgan and her parents' house the whole day.
We just hung out, had fun.
Yeah, it was a beautiful day. It was a beautiful spring day. It was warm, but it wasn't too hot. It was just nice enough that we could go outside. We could walk, just hang out outside. But then I left Morgan's house when it came time to go back for the evening service. I actually left and went back to my house, or my parents' house, to get a notebook to take notes about the preaching and just the different passages that were being preached out of. And so I went back, and then I made it back to the church that night, and
I definitely knew something had happened. I wasn't sure if it was just God was working on him, or if he had gotten saved. I wasn't sure exactly that day, but there was immediately a change. He was wanting to, come back to church with us that night. He was just seemed to have this lightness about him and this joy. And I remember just hanging out with him that day and thinking to myself, I am going to marry him. And that was kind of the first time I had let my guard down a little bit, and I just knew that God was working and he was doing something in my heart and in Cameron's heart. And I just kind of knew. It sounds cliche when people say, when you meet the one, you just know. But it really is true. And, if you haven't felt that, you probably haven't met the right one. So I used to remember getting so frustrated with people when they would tell me that. Because I'd be like, yeah, but how do you know? And they'd be like, you just know. But it really is true. When it's right, you know.
Yeah. And actually at this point, I had been telling my parents that even before I got saved, I'd been telling them, like, it's just something about this girl. I'm going to marry her. I'd just been telling them that I was going to marry Morgan. And then I got saved, and then we just kind of went on from there. And
yeah, I had been very straightforward with him before this point, before March 10th. I had told him, like, this is great being friends. I'm a very straightforward and blunt person, so I just laid it out there. I said, I am happy to be friends with you, but as far as this ever turning into anything more, I said, I don't know if you have feelings, but, it really can't be anything more than friends, just because, I am saved. I have certain beliefs. My church is my life, and I have to be with someone and be in a relationship with someone that feels the same way, who loves God, who wants to serve God, who wants to raise a family for God. And so I had been very straightforward with him. I wasn't being ugly about it. I just didn't want us to get involved and him to start having feelings, and me knowing down deep that it couldn't go anywhere, because I follow the verse. I didn't want to be unequally yoked. I knew I wanted to have somebody that was going to be saved, because that's so important. So once Cameron ended up getting saved, I had laid all of that out and told him, if you start having feelings for me, let me know, because we're going to need to reevaluate, and this is how I feel about it. Well, it only took him about 2 days after getting saved, and then he sent me the sweetest text message and telling me, that he did have feelings and stuff for me, and he just kept coming to church, and he kept growing, which was, it was wonderful to see that. Even though we were all super excited to see Cameron growing, my dad, he was still a protective father, as all fathers should be, and he was really wanting to, make sure Cameron wasn't just doing this for me, that it was truly, that God was doing this in his heart, and that Cameron was doing it for the right reasons. So he kind of, told us both he wanted Cameron to take 6 months after getting saved, of course, because Cameron had shared with my parents that he had gotten saved, take 6 months just to focus on him spiritually and not worry about being in a relationship. It was obvious to absolutely everybody around us that there was feelings between us, and we were attracted to one another, and that God was doing something in our lives. Everybody was joking us about it, and my parents obviously could see that. So my dad just had a serious conversation saying he wanted Cameron to be able to focus on himself spiritually before jumping into a relationship. And I honestly think that was such a wise decision on a parent's part. And I encourage other parents, if you see that, in your child, and you see that maybe they need to focus on themselves and growing spiritually before they jump into a relationship, it's okay to say that. They might be a little upset maybe right when it first happens, but in the end, they will thank you, because I am so thankful that my dad did that. So Cameron, just kept growing, but we knew, we had to focus on his spiritual growth. Yes, feelings were still, we're human. Yeah. Feelings were still growing for one another. We were still, spending time together, but we knew that as far as dating, that wasn't going to happen quite yet. However, my birthday was around the corner in July, so about 4 months later, and I had planned a trip to Baltimore, and my parents said that Cameron could go with us if he wanted to, and so he actually did join that trip with us, and we had an amazing time.
It was a blast. We rode scooters through the city, and we just had so much fun.
We stayed in a hotel that had a rooftop garden that you could walk your dog and stuff. So we had gone up there with all of my siblings. I can't remember. We had gone up there. And there was this big light up heart in the distance, and we got to stand up there and talk a little bit, and it was just very romantic. And we just talked about what God was doing. We talked about, we definitely felt like God was, leading us into a relationship, and we were excited about it, and we couldn't wait until, we could actually start that journey together. And then that next morning. Yeah.
Morgan, her dad and I were actually in the same room with her little brother. So we actually, I had been wanting to talk to him about me and Morgan. So, of course, we had to send the little brother out. So we sent him out, and me and her dad kind of sat down. We had a talk, and I had asked for his permission to start dating Morgan, because that was just the right thing to do. And of course, he was saying that, Morgan was his little girl. It's his oldest daughter. And of course he wanted to see me keep growing. He didn't want a relationship to get in the way of me growing spiritually, but he knew that I liked Morgan and Morgan liked me, so there wasn't a way he could stop that attraction between us. So he loved me anyways, and he said yes. He said, you can date her, you can start dating her. And at that point, when everybody came back in the room, we were able to say, I was able to ask Morgan if she wanted to start dating me, and from there on, we started dating, and we actually started dating the day before her birthday, which was super cool, and we were in Baltimore.
And Dad let it happen at 4 months instead of 6.
And it was just super memorable to be able to do it there in Baltimore. It was just a cool experience.
I love traveling, so that was something that was really special to me. I always like to take trips and stuff for my birthday, and I've been able to go out of the country and go to different places, and so that it happened while we were traveling was also something that was just really special to me. So we started dating in July, and we dated until March, which I think that's about 8 months. And then Cameron ended up proposing on March 1st. And we knew once we got engaged that we didn't want to be engaged long. We knew we wanted to get it done. So we only were engaged for 6 months before we got married. And there's a whole lot that happens in between there. We'll probably do another episode, like buying our house and how God worked that out. That is an amazing story.
It really is.
How God worked. How just God's hand in that and people he used. So that's probably a whole nother episode that we can talk about that. Also, we're just hitting the highlights. I don't ever want to make it sound like our relationship was just peaches and cream and all smooth from the very beginning. When we were dating, there were still things that we had to go through. There were still things we ran into. There were still little arguments. There were still, every couple is going to have that. There were still, things we ran into that it's like, how are we going to get past this, And God saw us through. We had some, major things happen, and God saw us through all of it. And because we knew it was God's will for us to be together, and we just had that peace, it didn't matter what came in our path, we were able to get through it. And something I do want to say is love is never confusing, and the right one and the right relationship shouldn't be confusing. That was something that in relationships I'd had in the past, it just seemed like got to a point where I hit a wall. I was confused. I wasn't sure if it was right. I would think it was right, and then I wasn't really sure, and I would second guess myself. If you're having to do that and you're kind of dancing around that, it might not be the one God has for you, because when it's right, love is not confusing. It's a beautiful, wonderful thing, and always follow the peace of God. Always listen for his still small voice when it comes to relationships. And I hope and plan to do a lot more episodes on dating and just waiting for that right one and talking about, different topics and different things we go through as young people. But that's just something that I definitely wanted to throw in there, that we definitely, it's not like our whole dating experience was absolutely 100% perfect because it was God's will. God still let us go through things that drew us closer to each other, but most importantly, closer to him. And so we got engaged for 6 months. We got married on August 29th of 2020. We had a COVID wedding. Again, something we can probably do a whole nother episode on, all the things that went wrong with our wedding because of COVID.
Every couple should have a list of everything that goes wrong when they're trying to plan a wedding.
Yes, when people say somebody's going to get a flat tire, it's going to happen. It happened to us. Like, things always plan for extra time on your wedding day because things are going to happen, and then getting married in the middle of COVID was absolutely crazy. So I'm sure we will talk about that a whole lot more. Some things also just that we want to leave you guys with is, when you are thinking about dating someone, I know our story, it seems like, oh wow, he wasn't saved and then got saved and God just worked all of that out. And I think girls especially get into a lot of dangerous ground here where they think, oh, he might not be saved or he might not believe exactly like I believe, but I'll just go ahead and date him and I can change him, or he'll change for me, or, hopefully God will save him. Do not ever do that. That is so dangerous. And I always, like I said, I made it very clear to Cameron, I cannot let my feelings, I cannot let that get involved, because this is what I believe. And God came first in my life. I had to set in my mind and my heart that it didn't matter how cute I thought he was, how handsome he was, how attracted I was to him. If he wasn't saved, if he wasn't going to be pursuing after God the way I was, it wasn't going to work. And I had set that in my heart and mind. So that is something I want to encourage, especially girls. Don't think you're going to change him, because that's not how God intends it to be.
Right.
Yes, it might be that God is going to save him. That's what God did for me, but that's not how all of these stories end. And I have seen way too many girls rush into relationships thinking I'll change him, or hopefully he'll get saved after we start dating, or after we get engaged, or after we get married, maybe he'll get saved. Do not do that to yourself. That's not how God has intended it to be. Set in your mind that God is more important, and this is the way that, I want to live my life. I want to follow God's word, and no boy, no man is ever going to change that. If you purpose that in your heart, God will bless that, and he will bring you that right one into your life. So that is just definitely something that we want to encourage everyone. Don't think that you're going to change them. You need to make sure you're being obedient to God's word, and then he will work all things together for his good and for his glory.
Right.
And we had safeguards in our relationship, which is something we will talk about more. We always had a chaperone with us. We didn't kiss until we got married. We didn't hug and hold hands and all of that, which we will get into all of that in other episodes. But, place safeguards in your relationship too. Keep yourself pure. The flesh is so real, and that is just something we want to make sure that we are putting out there. Make sure you are having those safeguards.
Yeah. And the flesh is just, you're still living in that same flesh, whether you're saved or lost. You're still living in that same flesh. You still have those same temptations, and just having those safeguards is definitely a blessing to be able to say, yes, we had chaperones and we always had them with us, but they were a blessing to us because it helped our hearts remain pure. It helped our thoughts remain pure. And that was just a huge part in our dating experience was, we saved our first kiss for the day that we got married. Which was very special for both of us.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that is all that we have for you guys. This might have been a little bit longer of an episode, but we had a lot to cover. We hope you guys enjoyed it, and we will see you in the next episode.
Bye.
If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a review and rate us. We are also uploading these podcasts to YouTube. Our channel will be linked below.
If you don't have time for an entire podcast episode, check out the 60-second Bible Food for Thought on our YouTube page. If you are listening on YouTube, please like, comment, and subscribe.
Feel free to email us at littleismuchmerch@gmail.com if you have any specific topics you would like for us to cover in a future episode, or if you would like to just say hi.
On some of our podcast episodes, we leave a Q&A on Spotify. We'd love it if you would participate.
We appreciate you listening.
And remember, little is much when God is in it.